No one would claim the newborn twins after their mother's burial, until a lonely rancher took them. The morning was too still. Frost clung to the edges of the wooden fence, the kind that never gets fully repaired, just patched enough to hold cattle and time. A single crow perched atop the crooked post, its silence louder than any cry. The land beyond the ranch was vast and empty, a stretch of golden weeds frozen in the windless dawn. The air didn't move. Even the horses stayed still in their stalls, heads low, steam puffing softly from their nostrils like ghosts. Caleb Boone poured a cup of coffee with hands that had forgotten how to tremble. Years on the land had made him tough, but it wasn't the kind of toughness that boasts. His eyes were quiet. His shoulders stayed low, like he'd learned not to take up space in a world that had taken too much already. He watched the thin trail of smoke curling from the chimney of the church across the valley, a church that only lit fires for two things: Christmas and burials. Today wasn't Christmas. He stood on the porch a moment longer, coffee untouched, and then pulled on his coat. By the time he arrived, the crowd was gone. Just a fresh mound of dirt, a wooden marker, no flowers, no names spoken twice. The preacher had already driven off in his old Chevy. Wind had picked up now, just enough to stir the dust. That's when he heard it. A sound like paper tearing, high, breathy, uncertain. Then again, a little louder. Two voices, small and broken, not in speech, but in instinct. He followed it behind the chapel. Two bundles, wrapped in old hospital blankets, propped in a wooden crate like spare parts someone didn't know where to return. Twins, infants. Their cheeks red from the cold, their mouths moving in protest, too tired to finish. Eyes shut tight against a world that hadn't welcomed them. A note, scrawled on a torn receipt: "Mother passed, no kin, no claim. Do what you must." Caleb didn't move. He stared, boots rooted to frozen ground. The wind pressed at his coat, whispering questions he didn't want to answer. No one else was coming. No voices in the church, no footsteps on the path. Just him, the dirt, the crate, and two beings too small to understand they'd been abandoned before their first word. He bent down. One of the babies opened its eyes, dark, unfocused, and let out a sound like a gasp. Caleb reached out, unsure why, and then he lifted the crate. As if his hands knew something his heart wasn't ready to admit. The crate sat in the back of Caleb's old truck, wedged between two sacks of feed. He drove slow. The babies had stopped crying, or maybe they'd never cried properly. It was more like whimpers, sounds that got lost in the wind, the kind no one listens for. One of them had hiccups now. The other had gone silent, eyes open but glassy. Caleb didn't know if that was normal. He hadn't touched a baby in over 20 years. The last one had been wrapped in a pink blanket. His wife had chosen the name. Maisie. She had lived 2 weeks. Pneumonia. The doctor said there was nothing they could have done, but Caleb never forgave the wind for that winter. He pulled into the ranch and sat for a long while before getting out. The sun had barely risen. No one would come looking yet. Not the sheriff, not the townsfolk. Everyone had seen the burial. Everyone had walked away. No one had asked about the babies. And maybe they weren't his to ask about either. Inside the house, he laid them gently on the worn sofa. One of them flinched when he pulled the blanket closer. The other curled a fist and pressed it to their mouth, but didn't suck. Just held it there, like it gave comfort by existing. Caleb knelt. He looked at their faces, so similar, and yet already different. One had a line above the B, row, like a crease from being worried. The other's eyelids fluttered like they were chasing something in sleep. Neither of them had any idea how alone they were. He rubbed his jaw. There was a bottle of whiskey in the cupboard, half full. He thought of pouring a glass, but he didn't. Instead, he sat on the floor and leaned back against the wall. The wood was cold behind him. his eyes fixed on a crack in the ceiling, running from the old leak that never got patched. For a moment he imagined Maisie up there, not as a baby, but as a woman. Someone who might have stayed, might have become more than just a name on a little marble stone out by the sycamore. And he thought of his wife, too, how she'd looked the morning they buried Maisie, how she never touched him again after that, how one day she packed everything into a single suitcase and left a note that just said, "I don't have it in me to stay." Caleb swallowed. He looked at the twins again. The fire in the stove crackled faintly, but the warmth didn't reach the corner of the room. He noticed one of the babies had stopped moving. He leaned in. The chest rose, then fell. Slow. Faint. Caleb stood. He went to the kitchen, fumbled through a drawer and found an old thermos, poured in hot water, dug through the pantry until he found the emergency formula someone had left behind years ago. Maybe a visitor, maybe a memory. He mixed, shook, tested. Then he knelt beside the quieter twin and pressed the rubber nipple to their lips. Nothing. Then, a tiny pull, a suck. The other one stirred. Caleb sighed. Not like a decision had been made, but like it already had. By the third day, word had started to spread. Not openly, not in town square whispers or over the diner's counter, but in the tight circles, the ones that lived beneath the law's eye. Folks who remembered the mother, and those who knew why she'd died with no one beside her. Caleb had stayed quiet. He didn't tell the sheriff, didn't call the county orphan office. He just fed the twins, wrapped them in clean cloth, and carried on. Their names weren't written down upon nowhere. He called them Boy and Little One. One had a stronger cry, the other only made sounds in sleep, like sighs from a dream they hadn't chosen. It was that Thursday, when he went into town for more diapers and milk, that things shifted. The clerk, Martha, gave him a long look when he laid the items on the counter. "You got company?" she asked lightly, eyebrows raised. Caleb didn't answer. Martha didn't press. But when he turned to leave, she added, "Someone was asking about her. The mother. 2 men. Weren't from here." He froze. "What kind of men?" "Didn't say names. Didn't give them either. Just showed her photo. Said they were cousins." She paused. "But they looked like men who didn't come to mourn." Caleb drove home faster than usual. That night, he sat by the stove, shotgun leaning against the wall, and watched the twins sleep in a basket he'd lined with towels. He hadn't lit the porch light. The barn stayed locked. The next morning, there was a letter shoved under the gate. "Those babies are not yours. You don't want the trouble tied to them. Leave them at the county office. You got 1 day." No name, no signature, but the words burned. That night, he finally opened the worn envelope the preacher had handed him at the burial, something he hadn't had the heart to read. Inside was the death certificate, a folded hospital form, and at the bottom, scribbled in the corner, a discharge note. Subject escaped protective custody, affiliated with Federal Witness Program, identity sealed. Caleb's chest tightened. The mother hadn't just died poor, she'd died hunted. And now, they were looking for what she left behind. He stood by the window staring at the edge of the property. The road was too quiet, too still. He thought of driving the babies to the next town, leaving them at the church. Maybe some younger couple would take them in. Maybe that was the safe choice. But then the girl, Little One, let out a soft cry. Not pain, not fear, just a whimper, like a reminder that she existed. Caleb turned back. He bent down, lifted her gently. She was lighter than she should be. She nestled into his chest like she belonged there. He didn't sleep that night, just sat with her, shotgun nearby, heart heavy, eyes on the door. Somewhere out there, someone wanted these children erased. But Caleb Boone had already buried one daughter. He wasn't about to lose another. Mornings took on a rhythm. Caleb would rise before the light broke and light the stove. The twins stirred in their crate near the hearth, soft grunts and tiny flails under wool blankets. He'd mix formula with hands that once strung barbed wire, now steady enough to hold a bottle just so. He fed them in silence, one after the other, their mouths small and trusting. He didn't speak to them, not because he couldn't, but because he felt he'd ruined the quiet they deserved. Some days he'd carry them out in an old basket lined with sheepskin, place them on the porch where the wind was blocked, and work nearby, splitting logs, fixing fence lines, mending old leather tack. He'd glance back every few minutes, not because he feared they'd be gone, but because he feared they wouldn't. When little one smiled for the first time, just a flutter of her lips in sleep, Caleb froze. He hadn't seen a smile like that in years. Not since his wife used to hum by the sink, eyes closed, dreaming of a life that had never come. Boy had stronger lungs. He cried when the milk was late. Caleb learned the rhythm, not by schedule but by instinct. When the cries would come, how to calm them. A warm palm on the chest. A deep hum. It didn't matter the tune. At night, he'd sit by the fire with them cradled against his chest, and he'd remember. Not all of it, just flickers. His wife's scream when the doctor shook his head, the silence that followed the tiny casket, the sound of her footsteps leaving the porch forever, how the air never quite warmed again, no matter how many springs passed. One evening, while feeding the horses, he paused beside the stall where the old mare had once foaled and died. There, he'd buried both animals under the ridge. He told no one. But now, holding little one against his shoulder, he whispered, "She didn't make it either." Little one blinked slowly, then laid her cheek down. Later, he found a small scar on Boy's leg. Faint, like an old needle puncture. It wasn't from birth. It was too precise, too familiar. He stared at it, his jaw tight. He remembered the army med tents, the crying, the children marked for tests they didn't understand. He had seen it all, done nothing. He swore under his breath, held Boy tighter. They weren't just orphans. They were remnants of something cruel. But here, in the quiet, they were only children. By the end of the week, he'd built a small crib out of pine planks, sanded it smooth, placed it near his bed. He carved tiny animals into the headboard, a fox, a bird, a horse. And on the 7th night, when a storm rolled in and the roof creaked, he lifted them into bed beside him, one on each arm, pressed close, his heartbeat slow, their breaths warm and shallow. For the first time in 20 years, he dreamt of nothing. Just peace. It was just after dusk when they came. 3 figures, dark against the falling night, pulled up in a black truck that didn't belong on a dirt road. Its engine growled too smooth. Its tires left no dust, just impressions like predators moving in silence. Caleb was on the porch, one hand on the bottle he hadn't drunk in years, the other resting on the worn grip of the shotgun beside him. The twins slept inside, the soft crackle of the fire shielding them from what was coming. The truck doors opened slowly. 2 men stepped out. One was broad, neck-tattooed, boots too polished for real work. The other was thin, almost polite-looking, but carried himself like someone who'd never been afraid of blood. The third man stayed in the truck, watching. The polite one raised a hand. "Evening, sir. Name's Elwood. We're here on family business." Caleb didn't speak. "We're looking for what's ours. The woman buried up the hill. She took something from us. We aim to collect." "They're not yours," Caleb said, voice low. "Funny thing," Elwood replied, smiling thinly. "Paperwork says different." He pulled a folded sheet from his coat, a custody claim, stamped and signed, forged probably, but official enough for any sleepy county office. "We ain't here for trouble," the broad one added. "Just the kids. Quiet exchange." Caleb stood. "I buried a daughter once," he said, stepping off the porch. Didn't hold her long enough to learn her name. I ain't burying another. The polite one sighed. Suit yourself. He snapped his fingers. The third man stepped from the truck, a shadow with a badge. Federal issue. Caleb's breath caught. Your law? He asked. Contracted, the man said. Mother was in protection. She broke protocol. Took something she shouldn't. Kids are classified as evidence. Caleb's grip tightened. You're not taking them. The federal man stepped forward, lifting his coat to show the weapon holstered at his side. They're not yours. Caleb lifted the shotgun. Doesn't matter. For a moment, the wind stopped. Then the front door creaked. Little one had woken. A soft cry, confused, lonely, filtered through the porch screen. All three men turned. That's when Caleb fired. Not at them, but into the air. A warning shot. The sound split the valley in two. The men flinched, hands reaching for their weapons. Don't, Caleb growled. You'll have to step over me. Silence stretched. Then a voice from the road. Another truck, battered, dusty, pulled up fast. Sheriff Harris. He stepped out, rifle across his chest. Got a call from Martha, he said, nodding toward the trio. Said some men were asking too many questions. Thought I'd check in. Elwood stiffened. The federal badge vanished back into the coat. This ain't your jurisdiction, one of them muttered, and it is tonight. They stared at each other. Long, tense. Then, slowly, the three men stepped back. This ain't over, the broad one warned, finger pointed. Caleb didn't answer. He just stood there, shotgun in hand, fire in his eyes. The headlights vanished over the ridge. The night settled back into stillness, but not peace. Not yet. Caleb stood motionless, shotgun at his side, breath steady but deep. The porch light flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows across the dirt yard. Sheriff Harris stayed a moment longer, watching the darkness, then gave a quiet nod and turned back to his truck. No words passed between them. None were needed. Inside, the fire had burned low. The twins had fallen silent again, curled close in the crib Caleb had built with hands that once refused to hope. He walked in slowly, closed the door behind him. He removed his coat, boots and hat, not out of habit, but out of reverence. The house felt sacred now, in a way it never had before, like it had become something more than wood and memory, a place where love had been replanted, fragile and raw. Caleb knelt beside the crib. Little one stirred. Boy flinched in his sleep. Caleb placed one hand on their blanket, gently pressing down, not to still them, but to steady himself. He looked at them for a long time. The federal badge, the forged papers, the truck full of ghosts. They could come back, maybe with more power, maybe with real signatures next time. But he'd made his choice. He wasn't giving them back. He wasn't letting them disappear. That night, he sat in the rocking chair, the twins beside him in the basket, wrapped together in the same blanket. He didn't sleep. The fire hissed and cracked softly. Outside, coyotes howled, distant and wild. He watched the flames flicker, saw his wife's face in the orange glow. He saw Maisie's grave. He saw 100 things he couldn't chew. But the crib, the basket, the breath of 2 tiny lungs against his palm, these were still his to protect. At dawn, he took a shovel out behind the barn. He dug a shallow hole near the old foaling tree. There, he buried the forged custody claim, the badge, the threats scribbled on paper, every reminder of the system that saw these babies as property. When he finished, he placed a small rock over the spot. Then he walked back up the hill. He found a marker, a flat stone from the creek, and scratched 3 letters into it, M for Maisie. Then 2 more, B and L, for the boy and little one who'd brought her memory home again. He placed it at the foot of the porch. The sun rose behind him, catching the roof, the fields, the window panes. Inside, the twins slept soundly. Caleb stood in the doorway, wind brushing against his chest like a slow exhale. He didn't smile, but he didn't feel hollow either. Not anymore. The seasons rolled forward like slow thunder. Winter folded into spring. Snowmelt crept down the hills and fed the stubborn weeds along the fence line. The wind softened. Trees budded. The sky stayed open. And the ranch changed. Not with noise, but with the kind of quiet that lingers after sorrow has been heard, held, and then released. Caleb no longer moved like a man waiting for something to be taken. His steps, once cautious, had grown deliberate. His eyes still carried the weight of old wars, but they no longer drifted to the past as often. They stayed here, in the present, with them. The twins learned to sit, to crawl. Boy giggled first, a sound that startled the horses and made Caleb choke on his coffee. Little one liked to reach for the sunbeam that fell across the cabin floor at dawn, fingers twitching as if grasping something invisible but alive. He built them things: a rocker, a mobile carved from driftwood, a sandbox filled with river stones. He read to them at night, voice hoarse but patient, tracing each word like it mattered. And in the quiet moments, when they slept and the house was still, he would sit on the porch and listen. Sometimes the wind brought nothing. Sometimes it brought birdsong. And once, just once, it brought a letter. No return address. No signature. Just a few words on plain paper. They won't come again. Thank you. He burned it without reading it twice. By the time summer stretched long and dry, the twins were walking. Stumbling, really. Feet wide, balance loose. Caleb followed behind them like a slow-moving shadow, hands always ready to catch but never hovering. On Maisie's birthday, he took them up to the ridge, showed them her stone, laid wildflowers beneath it. The twins didn't understand, but they were quiet, as if they sensed the space held something sacred. He didn't cry, but he whispered her name, and then theirs. Later that night, the three of them ate dinner by lantern light. No electricity, just stew, warm bread, and apples. The twins clapped at nothing in particular. Caleb smiled at everything in between. No one came looking again, no headlines, no agents, no threats, just the land, the sky, and the sound of two small voices learning the shape of safety. And one old man, who without realizing it, had come alive again.